So what I was going to do was to just give a kind of overview of how I see maths, how I approach it, and hopefully this will provide perspective at the very least, and hopefully for those who are not too confident with maths, it will be a point of entry for you for understanding how things work. And it's kind of, I think hopefully it will be a way of articulating what I feel that many of you have been saying about adapting patterns and working things out for your own shape, etc. So it's just about 3 slides or so, and then I will do some drawing for you to demonstrate what I mean. So, I tend to see maths on a bit of a spectrum when it comes to knitting. And I feel that, and just through my own practice, it has helped me to group up maths into these sections. I think, I can't remember if I said this in the last class, where I said that decimals or numbers were the lowest form of maths. But in a way, it's more like the end game for knitting. And this little chart here is my way of putting that together for you. So where it often begins is from a geometric point of view. And geometry is the kind of maths that we begin with as human beings. You have the toy shapes and blocks and things, and you're looking at continuous data in that sense. You've got you don't have to worry necessarily about counting. It's all mainly pictorial diagrams, pictures, and it's more sensory as well. And that's something that is normally really well understood by designers, especially if they are the kind who maybe draws things first, or even also as well, if you are approaching things from a more tactile point of view, working with the yarn and seeing what it tells you it wants to be, for example, because it's more, because I put forms in there just to emphasize the 3D nature of geometry. It's not just flat shapes. And sometimes with slopers and blocks, because you have to render them flat, so they are a 3D form, but represented on 2D paper so that you can translate them to fabric. That kind of thing falls into my geometry group as well. So that kind of thing is very accessible to people as well. Most people will understand a drawing quite well. But from there, I would move on to proportion, because whenever you have any kind of composition, whether it's a musical composition, a piece of artwork, anything that is made or designed, you're going to be dealing with ratios, fractions, percentages, how the pieces come together, how things relate to each other. And this is the kind of thing that you get in the design development stage, and you're starting to bring your ideas to life. And also, if you've done art classes before and you've done that measuring tip with the pencil, etc., it's that kind of thing. So you're using a tool, whether it's your eyes or a fraction of the pencil, to determine how each piece relates to the other. So, for example, the handle of the cup, is that the same size as the teaspoon next to it, for example? This is how you gauge the size and shape of other things in the drawing from those compositional relationships. And it's that going back and forth as you draw. If you paint regularly or have done in the past, drawing, that kind of thing, this is how you get a sense of space, how you arrive at size of certain things, because everything is not in, things are just never in isolation. There's always something to hook onto. Even if you've just got a picture of just one item, you're still thinking about proportion and composition because you have to frame it. It just gets more complicated when you just have more elements or more items in your field of vision. So, and then from that, proportion is what I see as the bridge between the shape, between geometry and number. Because once you establish relationships between your compositional elements, you can then transcribe them or translate them into units, discrete units of data. And so stitches, and by that, you've also got pattern drafting and pattern grading there as well. Because when you look at the proportions of something, that means that you can, it tells you something about the shape or the form of whatever object you're looking at. And then you can also turn that into a number as well. The thing with numbers, especially with knitting patterns, is that when you have information in that form, it's not always easy to reverse engineer the numbers to see how someone arrived at it. You kind of are looking for a sequence or patterns in the numbers, especially when you have grading for a sweater. And sometimes you can do it, and sometimes you're less confident, and sometimes you have no idea. But I would like to suggest that there's always some form of proportion or ratio behind any discrete data that you get in a finished pattern. I'll move on to the next one. So on that note, this is kind of how I think about numbers, because when you think about, I'll put decimals in, that should just be number. But that would be, for me, the AB negative if branches of the maths above were blood groups. And in case this is lost on anybody, when you donate blood, I think AB negative is the one that cannot donate blood to anybody. If you're O negative, you can give blood to anyone, but if you're AB negative, all you can do is receive. And that's kind of how number works for knitting patterns. You can transcribe things into number, but you can't necessarily convert numbers back into shape unless you have some understanding or you get some lead on the proportions that led to those numbers in the first place. But the thing with knitting is that however you arrive at the design, whether it's a proportional relationship or it's just geometry, you have to end up converting it to number or discrete data. And I would offer that the process of getting from ideas and shapes to number is the difficulty with realizing designs. So that's how I see things. So from a pattern drafting point of view, the goal or the problem-solving quest is to recontextualize or translate the visual relationships that you create, and you do that in the ones that we've done in visual communication and design development, and this relates to surface pattern and silhouette there. You transcribe or translate those into programs, numerical programs that you can use for pattern drafting and grading so that other people can follow them. So that's the philosophy I have as far as drafting and grading is concerned. I think sometimes because there is a certain security in numbers or numerical units, you can get sometimes slightly, well, I wouldn't say hung up on them, but it's more, they tend to distract people from what's actually going on beneath the surface sometimes. And part of what I want to do is to re-establish that connection for you or show it to you in a different way that helps you become less afraid or a bit less lost when it comes to not just adapting patterns for yourself, but also points of entry for you when you create your own. And so, to recap on the left side, those forms of maths, is basically making sure that you can understand your design along all those forms of maths. And, you know, and this kind of communication, being able to articulate your design in many different ways, showing how one part relates to the other. Those are the kinds of conditions that will help you to draft the pattern, but also to grade it later on. Those are the kinds of principles that will help to take you through for more than one body, and a size chart, and any size chart, depending on how you understand the proportions of your design. And proportion is especially important in drafting and grading, because it's the bridge between the composition of your design and the composition of the human body, so any human body. And so a lot of what I'll be doing is showing you the universal connections between bodies. There'll be variation in measurements, yes, but not in architecture. That's the reason for including the anatomy in this. And by focusing on the underlying architecture that all human bodies share, it then becomes much easier, or, you know, the light starts to get switched on when you start thinking about how it can work, how your design can work for other people, whether you can see them or not. Just going to get Illustrator open so I can just draw the kind of thing that I mean as well. So this is I'll do a few drawings of the kind of thing that I mean when it comes to proportion. There's lots of different ways you can understand this related to surface pattern and silhouette, but I'll draw a few and ask you to help me out here. Right. So there we go. Right. So here is a very crude drawing of part of a jumper top. It could be the back, it could be the front, it could be either one. But let me, so if I put here, okay, so here is X. So how would you define or quantify X in this situation? It's not a trick question at all. What can you say about it in relation to the jumper shape? What I'm getting at is the point X. Point X. So it's halfway along the shoulder. So X is that point halfway along the shoulder. So that's one way of understanding that point. You could also, that point halfway along the shoulder, that will be the case for whatever shape body that jumper gets drafted for. So whatever your shoulder measurement is, if this dimension is important to your pattern, for example, if I go to the other side and give it a neckband, that then becomes an important landmark or key to the proportions of the jumper. The whole line is the shoulder width, but in terms of there being a point on that line, it's rather than measuring it and saying it's, you know, let me write something here. So 6 centimeters. So that could be the distance from here to there. Yeah, so that could be 6 centimeters. It could also be 15 stitches. But the most important thing is that it is half shoulder width. So this is the kind of thing, this is what I mean by defining the different points along your design. So you don't have to, so the 6 centimeters, 15 stitches is not helpful yet. What you're looking at is to understand things proportionally in that sense. So you're ascribing ratios, fractions, percentages for understanding the distance either between 2 points or along a particular line in that sense. So if we know that X is half the shoulder width, then it doesn't matter if the shoulder in question measures 10 centimeters, 12 centimeters, 14 centimeters, you'll still be able to find half. And so whichever body you draft or grade for, as long as you know the shoulder width, you can find that particular mark for the pattern and know that the neckline starts there. So I'm just going to scoot upwards. Here we go. So let's draw another one. So I'll just stay in the top half. And I'll just add in a few more dimensions as well. I do not claim to make anything symmetrical. Right, so this time X is the line that I'm going to draw. I'm going to draw another line and call that Y. Okay. So again, thinking about it in terms of proportion, ratio, etc., how would you relate line X to line Y? So 1/3 of Y. Yep. And then having that proportion there, so having that proportional relationship means that you can go in a few different directions as well. So we could also say, as well as being 1/3 of Y, you could say that it's 33% of that distance once you have the armhole depth. You could also say that for, okay, ratio is my worst suit. So I apologize for that. Proper maths people, please correct me. You know who you are. So every, there we go. Okay. So there we are. So we've got the ratio, we've got a percentage, and you've got a fraction. So again, still talking about the composition of your design, you can do this with your sketches, because with your sketches and your artwork that you produce, trying to conceptualize your design, you're putting it down on paper as you imagine it to be in real life. And whether you're doing observational drawing or if it's just coming from out of your imagination, it's a lot easier to articulate your ideas when you draw them. And this is why drawing or using visual tools is so powerful, and also why you don't necessarily have to be good at drawing. But just as when you're drawing a still life composition, and you're trying to get the measure quite literally of all the objects around in your composition, how big one thing is in relation to the other, you can do exactly the same thing for your design ideas. Because often when you have different design elements like necklines, like collars, like sleeve lengths, if you've got volume in the sleeve, however complex they are, they're always tied to some bodily dimension. It doesn't have to be any one in particular. but it just means that whatever it is that makes the composition work, whatever information you get from your drawing, looking for those relationships is really helpful for grading, especially if you're very visual about it. So it doesn't matter what you have, so long as you can communicate it somehow. So whether it's, so you could use fabric or 3D modeling to do it. But again, you don't have to be good at drawing. You just have to articulate what you mean. If you can do it with a picture, that's fine. But I would generally say, I like it when people annotate. I liked it when students annotated as well, because sometimes drawings can be really powerful, but you do need to convey somehow what the deal is so that things don't get lost in translation. Okay. So I think even if if you don't feel the drawing is particularly good, or it's not quite what you want it to be, you've still got that thing in your mind's eye that you're holding on to. So even if you go further down the road and start drafting the pattern or testing out certain bits of it, and you think, nope, that's not quite it, it's still an iterative process. You're still going back and forth and thinking, okay, what about the drawing was not quite it? What proportions need to change? But I would suggest drawing just because it's quicker than knitting.